Obviously, how you develop the strategy for the product then influences the internal processes, right? And the internal decision-making process to align with how you make decisions for
True,
the business.
true.
And so with that, maybe we can talk a bit about performance management and that being one of the processes, obviously, as a top priority for HR. Would you be able to share a little bit about what phase you are in terms of the performance management process right now? Could you give me a little bit of background of where you are? Yeah.
Oh, certainly, certainly. So, our performance management process has evolved over a period of time.
Mm.
And the primary reason why it has evolved is because the needs within the organization, the talent within the organization has evolved as well. So, some of the changes that we've seen in our processes, if I can list down a few. So, uh, we've moved away from a 4-point scale to a 5-point scale. This is one change. It was so the scale, the assessment scale itself. Second was from uh, not so frequent formal touch points to more frequent formal touch points. In the past, we've not used a formal assessment criteria. Now we've introduced an assessment criteria, rather, I'd say a framework, which is the 9-box framework in the organization. So all of this has, like I said, has primarily come from the feedback from our employees, our managers, our leadership, who have brought in a certain valuable insight or feedback or input in terms of how we should now look at the performance management. If I talk about continuation of how this has changed, even within HR, it has changed. Obviously, the HR, uh, folks have to drive this. So, few years ago, we used to do a very mechanical training around the platform, very mechanical training around what the process is, go in the system, show them what to do, etc. But now there is a lot more that we do as an HR and to partner with our stakeholders better, right? Uh, Here we now start to focus what is really in it for them.
Mm.
When I say them, it's the employees, the managers, and leaders. We bring in real coaching and practical advice in terms of what should really be done if you encounter a certain scenario. So we're equipping a lot of our managers and leaders. We are helping them prioritize, in different scenarios. How do you prioritize a decision making over talent? Uh, a lot of our talent is homegrown. A lot of our managers and leaders are homegrown. This is their first job and they've continued to grow here. So their exposure to the world outside is limited.
Mm.
So we try and bring in that outside in perspective of what's really working by bringing in a framework, be it a written or a conversational input. So these are the changes that we've seen in the process. This is how we've evolved in this process of performance management technique.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'd love to double click on some of the things that you've shared so far. And maybe we can start with this idea that you just ended on in terms of coaching employees and managers. I hear that this is a very common challenge for many organizations. How do we ensure high quality feedback from the managers? How do we ensure that they dedicate time and attention to this process? Because obviously it's additional work for them, right? Could you maybe share an example of a pushback or a challenging situation that you have faced with manager or an employee and how you went about coaching or your team went about coaching this team member?
Certainly, certainly. So let me, before I answer this, let me also tell you how we've lightened the process.
Mm,
Because you mentioned this is usually an administrative,
yeah.
time-consuming process for most managers. So what we've done is we've brought in two major changes. One is this introduction of 9-box, which is run every quarter,
Mm.
or which will be run every quarter now. So which means that the managers, leaders, and the employees have a fair assessment of where they are on their performance journey, as well as their potential journey. So at any point in time, if this feedback shared with an employee, they are not surprised why they're receiving that feedback, be it good, bad, or ugly. So that's one thing that has helped. Second, our mid-year process. So we while we have these touch points, we have a mid-year and a final year assessment. The mid-year is extremely light
Mm.
with no rating, but just letting the employee know whether they're on track or off track compared to what their goals are or what is the expectation the organization has for them. So it reduces a lot of administration and time, and it allows the managers to focus on having real conversation, what it makes sense for somebody to come up the curve in the remainder of the. So this has helped us tremendously in driving the right message to our employees, and they're more convinced. The number of pushback is relatively much lower than what it used to be before we had these changes in the process. Additionally, in both the cycles, we do a thorough manager training. Manager training, while I'm sure all organizations do this, what we also have done is we've trained managers on what could different scenarios look like. So we equip them with a framework on how to give feedback. If you're a first-time manager, it's kind of a mandate that they go through this training for seasoned managers as well. So how to give a feedback, how to structure their feedback. This is largely driven by culture. So we bring in the culture sensitization. Like for example, somebody in APAC would prefer this differently versus somebody in the US. So receiving feedback and
Mm.
giving
Mm.
feedback. If the manager is in the US, that sensitization on how to give feedback to somebody in APAC and vice versa. So those elements are touched in the manager training to make sure that they understand before they walk into that. And largely in the manager training, we do bring in common scenarios that we as HR partners learn over a period of time in terms of what could happen. For example, a scenario where somebody does not believe or accept the rating that is being given to them. So if if all the ducks are in the row, this scenario shouldn't happen. But in case that happens, how much time should the manager spend there and then decide to have a follow-up conversation or bring in the HR part? So those are nuances that we again talk about in our manager training to make sure that the managers are equipped to know that they need to break that conversation at that point in time.
Mm.
In all of our recommendations, our training to manager is to take a coaching approach rather than a tell approach in the performance management.
Mm.
So we usually begin with, so tell me, how do you believe the year has been or the quarter has been? What are the aspects that has worked for you? What are your own learnings? And then we bring in an aspect of the manager then seeking a permission on, okay, I agree with 7 points of the 10 you said, but I have a slightly different view about the three other. Are you okay to receive this feedback? So we
Mm.
structure it in a way so that the acceptability of the feedback is far higher. So these are the points we train our managers on to make sure that the pushback is limited. Uh, it's not that we don't get pushback or there are no escalations to HR after the process, but at least our managers are equipped to handle a scenario in a one-on-one if there is one, and then we take on anything which is exceptional with the leaders, with the manager in a tripartite format, or in a group if the need be. So yeah, that's the broad approach we've taken at MEM to equip the performance management
And
philosophy.
wow. And I love that because it also helps you and the team iterate on the process, right? The more scenarios you're then able to bring into the training, you're able to, equip managers in advance about how to hold that space without
True.
feeling that fear, right, of giving constructive feedback. Because I think often constructive feedback is coming from uncertainty or
Yes.
fear of, oh, how is this going to affect my uh, reputation or the way people see me, right? So giving them tools is such a big part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is about credibility at the end of the day for manager as well as for the employee. Nobody likes to lose the credibility. And hence, these frequent formal and informal touch points add a lot of value.
Yeah.
A constant assessment of where the employee is moving on the performance versus potential curve gives a lot of comfort to both people in terms of where they're headed when we do the final year assessment.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned the 9 box framework. This is one that we also actually integrate into our leadership programs. But would you be able to share a little bit about how you decided on this framework specifically compared to others? And are there other frameworks that you explored when thinking about what to integrate as well?
Yes, so this has been a journey for us as well. So a few years ago, we did not have any mechanics around assessing
Mhm.
of our talent. Few years ago, we introduced the 4 box because we were not too big an organization, and 9 box was a tool that will uh, like we need to have a certain number of people to fit into 9 box, otherwise it doesn't serve the purpose. So we introduced 4 box. As we grew as an organization, we saw the need to now, look at something which is wider, which helps us differentiate our talent outside of that 4 box.
Mm.
And very naturally, because we were using 4 box, 9 box was the first preference because the format, the thinking is something that the organization and the managers will use. So there was a very natural choice for us. However, we did not go just because it was available. We did an assessment. What we've done is we've customized the 9 box to suit aspects of NIM. So while one basically the vertical side of our 9 box is performance, which is largely driven by the 5 point scale now. The other aspect of 9 box grid comes out from potential, and we've defined potential keeping NEOM philosophy, which is agility, which is responsiveness, which is collaboration. So it primarily is driven by the value system, which contributes to potential.
Mhm.
So that is how we were able to arrive at this model, and we thought it was a good model for us to implement. Uh, so that's the journey of how we landed with 9 box and where we are.
I love that. I love that integration of the values into the performance so that it's actually customized to what the needs are of the organization, right? And
Yes.
explicitly stating the behaviors that are expected.
True.
Um, Amazing. And something you mentioned earlier that is a bit more technical, but I want to dive a bit deeper is you move from a 4 point scale to a 5 point scale. Could you share a bit more about the rationale behind this?
Uh, so 4 point scale, because we were using a 4 box model,
Mhm.
it tied in quite well with the 4 point scale.
Yeah.
However, in the process, so what had happened between then and now is we introduced NIM values. So
Mhm.
values of our organization, expected behaviors, etc., which was not fitting directly into a 4 point scale.
Mm.
Because at that time we wanted to integrate the how and the what, which is the performance and the behavior in the performance process. So we had to identify which was more suited to the growing need of how we wanted to assess talent. And that's where we adopted a 5 point scale. Uh, it also helped us while we don't enforce a bell curve, but it helped us give some guidance to our managers in terms of how to spread their talent, how to look at their own talent within the team.
Mm.
While we don't enforce it, while we don't ask managers to peg them, but it naturally at some stage you'd start to see a certain curve. It doesn't have to be a bell curve, but you start to see that differentiation. So 5 point scale helped us bring that differentiation with meets in the middle. The above is what is basically people who are exceeding. Below them are where we may need some kind of intervention. So it helped us create that, and then naturally, as we what we did after that is we merged our uh, how and what into our performance,
Mm.
which is also the journey that I was talking
Yeah.
about. And then we now have a potential, which is a slightly different way of looking at. So that's purely behavior, whereas our performance is driven by how it. And that's what has helped us get our 9 box together. So that journey has been very interesting for us. We are starting to see some data come out, some information come out, which we're processing.
Yeah. And it's great that to hear this journey because I feel like a lot of companies start off with performance in terms of achieving results, but once you explicitly state those values, it's such a good opportunity to really readjust, right? And iterate how you expect people to work beyond just reaching results. And I'd love to hear from you as a, you know, while you've been on this journey, what has been the biggest challenge that you have faced over this process?
Oh, there's so many. I can go on and on and on about challenges. Uh, so and I'm gonna give it a thought before I say, because there's so many thoughts that are coming to me right now. Sure. I think maturing our managers was one of the biggest challenges we had, because we kept changing the performance management. If we look at the graph, every few uh, months, there's been a significant change in how we've started to assess that. And not everybody was up there to understand how and what needs to be done to make sure that we assess uniformly. So getting that, I think, was the biggest learning. It's been a challenge, but it's been a learning for us to work with our managers on that piece. So having managers, employees, and leaders understand why we are changing, what it means in terms of change, what will be the benefit to the organization, because that's the essence. Whatever we change is because we want to drive a certain outcome for the organization. So for them to accept that, and not everybody understands and accept it at the same time. So I think that has been the biggest challenge for us. It's the change management in terms of when we adopted or we evolved in our performance management. People like to be in comfort zones. If they've done something in the past that has worked for them, there will be resistance to change, but we need to evolve as an organization. So that bridging that journey for a certain set of people, I think was the biggest challenge for us.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure that ties back into what we just talked about around training them, evolving the training, some people accepting the fact that I guess some people might take a bit more time, and that's okay, right?
That's so
Because we often feel like, oh, we delivered the training, we told you all of this, right? How come you don't get it? And it takes time.
it does. And then your people over a period of time. So you know that you have to go in the system and check whether they've written the feedback the way it should have been written, right? Like there's some cases, some scenarios you'd want to validate before the results are published. So that sanity check is something that we as the HR partners are very, very, uh, you know, on top of. And we want to make sure that no wrong messages are sent. Like, just to give an example, an employee is given rating of, say, does not meet expectations, but the feedback written there is, oh, you've been a fabulous individual. We want to make sure that contradicting messages don't go out on the same form. So that sanity check is also sometimes very, very important. Not everybody's comfortable, managers, they're not comfortable giving tough feedback. So how do we equip them to give a tough feedback? So yeah, that change management has been a great learning for all of us.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you. I think a lot of our community members will resonate with that. And the final question I had for you is, if you were to give one advice to someone who is taking a look at their performance management system, looking to revamp it, or they're at the like early stages of actually getting the buy-in from leaders to incorporate this, what would that advice be?
Uh, Again, there's so many things that are coming to my mind, but um, if I have the liberty, I'm gonna give few.
Mhm.
So first, I think as an HR professional, we need to understand the requirement of the organization, the stage of growth. the type of talent that sits within our organization, and then decide the process of building or revamping our performance management process. Just because a similar organization or our competition adopts a certain philosophy doesn't mean it'll work for us, right? Like somebody else. So one size does not fit all. And the leaders need to participate in the performance management process as much as the HR is driving. So I think that's the first key message that I have. It is about understanding the landscape of our own organization and
Mm,
then deciding the performance management process, tool, framework, etc., etc. Second, from my own experience, I can tell you that it's okay to change
mm,
the processes frequently. Sometimes this will create confusion. Some employees may complain, some managers may not be happy. They may not understand why HR keeps doing that. But I can tell you with confidence that if if there are if there are sessions conducted with the intent to explain them what what does this mean for the organization, and how does this help the organization transform, and then connect it to what's in it for them, it usually works. So my second learning or second message will be it's okay to change. Just
mm.
because we've adopted a process doesn't mean we have to stick to it for life.
Yeah.
It's okay to change over a period of time. In this process, what is important is very clear and crisp communication, conducting very specific cohort sessions for people whom we know may be troublemakers. I'm sorry for using that word, but it's important for them to be taken along.
Yeah.
And this could be a very small population in each organization. But driving that change management is our responsibility as HR professionals and not the responsibility of leaders or managers or
Mm,
employees.
mm,
So it's okay to change, but we need to own the change process.
mm, mm,
And the final thought that I can leave with is the driving force behind any performance management process is to have a better and a more actionable feedback where the action holder, the employee at the end of the day, is convinced that that feedback will help him or her grow as a professional within that company or in that industry. So performance management can work brilliant if the culture around the performance management aspect is respected. So
mm,
it's about creating a culture where giving and receiving feedback is respected the same way. So these are the three lessons that I've learned while implementing performance management and here as well as in my previous organizations. And I think these these are things that I don't read about on a blog or hear in a or read in a book, but these are my own practical learnings that I have witnessed too. So yeah, these are some of the top of mind recollections on what works.